Hey, this is Michael.
And this is Andy.
And on this episode of Bobbleheads, we're going to be comparing Magic the Gathering and Flesh and Blood, specifically the limited format. We'll figure out what's the same, we'll figure out what's different, and also what you can look forward to going ahead, whether that's in the soon-to-be-released Tales of Aria expansion for Flesh and Blood, or some of the events where you can get your hands on some cards and try out the things you've learned.
Michael and I are both coming from a Magic the Gathering background, specifically with an emphasis on the limited formats. And so when we're starting to look at Flesh and Blood Limited, we naturally compare it to what we're used to with Magic. So there are two main limited formats in Flesh and Blood, just like there are in Magic, Sealed and Booster Draft. With Sealed, you get 6 packs and you make your deck out of that. With Draft, you get 3 packs each, and you play in an 8-person pod where you pass all the packs around to the left, then back around to the right, and then back to the left for the last pack. As in Magic, Draft is a lot more streamlined and synergistic than Sealed decks tend to be.
And that's really where we saw the similarities stop. From there, you've got a different composition, you have a different number of cards to put in your decks, and I think there's a lot of ramifications that we can kind of flesh out and figure out kind of what we can expect based on our experience as Magic the Gathering players and how we can apply that. So really the first thing that comes to mind is the composition of a Flesh and Blood deck and how that differs from your typical Magic the Gathering decks. Would you kind of help me understand what that difference looks like and really what goes into a Flesh and Blood deck?
Sure. So in Magic, you play with 40 card decks, but generally you only play with 23 of the cards that you get out of either your sealed pool or your drafted cards pool. And then you add 17 lands from outside of the sealed environment to your deck to get to 40. In Flesh and Blood, however, you play with a 30-card deck, which is smaller, but you have to draft all 30 cards or get all 30 cards out of your sealed pool. You build it around a singular hero, and you can only play cards that are the same either talent or class. They've been mixing the terminology a little bit in the last couple sets, but you can only play cards that match your hero, basically.
So that have some shared affinity with the card that your hero
Exactly.
is. Okay.
And then you also have 4 equipment slots, and if you want to play equipment, those also have to come out of either the cards that you draft or the cards that you open and sealed. And the difference between 30 and 40 cards may not seem that significant, but if you think about the number of draft picks that you can waste, I think that really illustrates the constraints that Flesh and Blood has that may not be as apparent in a game like Magic.
So in Magic the Gathering and Flesh and Blood, you end up drafting 45 cards. And in Magic the Gathering, as you're familiar with, you want to end up using about 23 of those cards to make your deck. And the rest of your deck will be filled out with lands. And so what that means is you end up having 22 cards that you get rid of out of your draft. So you can consider a lot of things like power levels and color combinations, and you can test things out to see how they work and make decisions around that. In Flesh and Blood, you have to make a 30-card deck and find 4 equipment for a total of 34 cards out of your 45 cards that you've drafted. So you only have about 11 cards to burn. So in a draft scenario, that means that you might feel like you have fewer options. And so that kind of begs the question, when you've been doing limited format in Flesh and Blood, have you been finding that it's better to kind of commit early so that you kind of start amassing better cards for your set? Or what is your approach when you've been looking at that?
I think the very best decks are ones where you commit hard early and you happen to be lucky that you're in the right deck for your seat. And unfortunately, that's not the case often enough that I think that that's the correct strategy. I think the better way to go about it is to really focus on getting the equipment early and getting any generics early that can go in any deck, and then pay real close attention to the signals that the people that are passing you packs are sending you. And if you can figure out what decks they're in and what heroes they're likely to be playing, and you just pick a different hero that's open, you're much more likely to have a strong deck for that hero, and then you should be able to lock in and go hard for that deck and not have to waste as many picks early as if you started down one path and then realized, oh, that's getting cut really hard. I think the person right next to me is in the same deck. I need to get out, but I've already wasted 4 or 5 picks.
Gotcha. And just for context, you mentioned generics, and I don't know if we covered that before, but like Andy was saying earlier, a lot of these cards that you're drafting will have a certain affinity towards a hero, whether that's light or dark or warrior or prismatic or whatever it is. These generic cards are ones that are going to end up being contested regardless of what hero is playing. So I wanted to provide a little context behind that. But moving on with the conversation about what it looks like to draft or do a sealed format in Flesh and Blood. With what seems like fewer options, I guess I would just ask you, did you feel like when you were playing that the decks were weaker or not as cohesive as decks that you've played in Magic the Gathering?
It's tricky to evaluate that because I feel like the fact that every card can be a resource or can be played as what the text of the card reads, it flattens out the power level quite a bit because the worst card in Flesh and Blood still pitches for 1, 2, or 3, or still defends for 2 or 3, and there's not that much power differentiation the way there is in Magic. So I don't know that it's weaker, but it's certainly different, and I think the power level is a lot flatter. And so to be able to find opportunities where you are getting some upside with some of your cards is more important because I think those opportunities are more rare.
Yeah, and in my own experience, what I did feel like was that even if I wasn't necessarily drafting all of the perfect cards for the deck, they weren't weaker, and I felt a lot of the times like I was at least getting a chance to do the thing that the deck looked to do. So even if it wasn't like the best card in the set to help with the biggest setup play, I still got a lot of chances to kind of do the ninja thing or do the wizard thing, which I really appreciated.
And I think as any Magic player is familiar with mana flood, mana screw, you just don't feel like you're playing the game. And that's the worst part. When it's such a great game, you want to be playing the game. And in Flesh and Blood, all of your cards are resources and all of your cards can be played. And so you never have a situation where you just can't do anything. It may not be the best thing in the world to be doing, but you're always able to do something with your hand.
Yeah, and I found I ended up doing a lot more interesting things and enjoying the game a lot more when I shifted away from the Magic the Gathering mindset of I don't have what I want, so I'll wait, and moving into this Flesh and Blood idea of you have all of your resources immediately from the start of the game, and it's just your choice to do what you like. So I've definitely appreciated that aspect of getting into this game. So I guess the other question is, and the last one that we'll leave, whether decks are stronger or not, is I was kind of curious. Did you feel like there was a lot of space to kind of modify the decks you had, or would you say that the decks that are being drafted and sealed are less diverse within a pool, or is there space for innovation?
I don't know that there's a ton of space for innovation because in general, once you pick what hero you're going to play, you do play 90-95% of the cards that you have that go with that hero. Just because, like we said before, the card pool that you're drawing from is so small, you really just have to kind of jam anything that remotely works together. So I don't know that you have that much flexibility to be creative and to try a bunch of real off-the-wall things in Flesh and Blood. You just kind of have to pick a hero, understand what they like to do, what they don't like to do, and just let them dictate your strategy and just follow them to where that type of deck needs to be.
Yeah, and speaking of type of decks, something we've mentioned a whole lot is that each of these heroes that you're playing as, they really have a couple of affinities. And so something that I was thinking about as I was making a deck, I didn't feel like there was really any option in the way that the game is currently set up for what we might call 2 or 3 color decks or splashing in Magic the Gathering. And so I wanted to take a minute and see from your perspective, have you seen anything outside of generics where it's felt like you've been able to splash or modify a deck at all?
No, up to this point, if you wanted to put it in Magic terms, I would say all of the class-specific cards feel like multicolor cards. Like they go in exactly one deck. It's not like you draft a blue card, but that could go in blue-red or blue-white or blue-black or blue-green. I remembered all the colors.
There you go.
But yeah, the cards that are not generics tend to just go in one deck. And then in Monarch, the most recent Flesh and Blood set, they had Light and Shadow, which had 2 heroes each. So those were twice as flexible, but still You couldn't play them in just any kind of deck. And because you're limited to playing one hero, in every set up to this point, that's meant you have 4 heroes to choose from. There are 4 viable archetypes, as opposed to Magic the Gathering, when if a format's going well, there are 10 color combinations and any of 10 decks is viable.
So looking forward, though, it does look like there might be an opportunity within Flesh and Blood to kind of mix things up as far as what we might think of as color combinations. And that'll come in the newest set coming out in September called Tales of Aria. The spoilers kind of start here in a couple days, actually. The 1st of September is what they're calling preview season. And fortunately, we've already had something spoiled. And that is one of the heroes that will be coming out. Her name is Lexi, and she will be an elemental ranger. And she will, unlike anyone who's come before her, be imbued with the elements of both ice and lightning. So that really begs the question, when we start seeing cards, I'm really curious to see if they might have ice affinity cards and lightning affinity cards and whatever other elements. Maybe they share between the heroes different elements.
So LSS has said that this set is going to have 3 heroes in it. And we've also already seen one of the pre-release promos is an Earth Elemental card. So we know that there's Ice, Lightning, and Earth, and we know that Lexi is both Ice and Lightning. So people are hypothesizing that one of the other heroes will be Lightning and Earth, and one of the other heroes will be Ice and Earth. And then each one will be a combination of 2 of the 3, and they can kind of rotate around. And if we get that, that's going to feel a lot more like Magic, where you can draft an Ice card, and you don't necessarily have to commit to Lexi. You could be whatever the Ice-Earth hero happens to be. Or if you draft a Lightning card, and then the next pick is an Earth card, you don't have to say, well, I'm just wasting one of these picks. That could actually be a deck. They could go well together. Which is something that Flesh and Blood has never had before, and I'm really excited to see, first of all, if we're right that that's what the hero cycle winds up being, and then also how all those cards work together.
I agree. I think it would be a great thing for not just limited, but also thematically to play the different characters and just try different things. Maybe one of those elements, and it turns out that 1 or 2 decks are competing against each other and you get to try them both out. It just sounds like nothing but upside to give decks more variety. With that being said, I feel like we've covered quite a bit of kind of what the experience is like to play Flesh and Blood Limited, and hopefully for people watching, this gives you an idea of what you can kind of expect and look for as you're looking to play this game. I know I've really enjoyed it, and I'm grateful you've shown it to me. And with that said, why don't we take a look at the things to come?
Sure, yeah. I mean, from a limited perspective, we're kind of in a lull right now. Everybody's just waiting for Tales of Aria stuff to start rolling out. And with that in mind, the first preview for Tales of Aria will be September 1st, and then they'll roll out several cards a day, I think, for the next couple weeks. The world premiere of Tales of Aria is actually going to be happening at the Las Vegas Calling. September 10th, I believe, is the Friday, and that will be when the Tales of Aria sealed first ever event happens. And then the rest of that weekend will be a Classic Constructed Calling. And then a week later, everybody gets to play with Tales of Aria cards at pre-releases on September 17th through the 19th. That's a Friday through Sunday. There's events every day of the week. If you go to fabtcg.com, they have resources for you to help find a store that's near you and find events that you can participate in. And then the pre-release happens a week before the release. And so on September 24th, that's when you can start actually buying booster boxes. I've already got a pre-order. And you can buy the Blitz decks, and just singles I'm sure will start going on sale.
Yeah, I know I'm really excited to get my hands on cards, and I know we'll be at events on the pre-release weekend of the 17th through the 19th. From there, we mentioned the Calling Vegas. For people that aren't familiar, the Calling format is going to be really familiar if you're a Magic the Gathering player. Like many people, the people that make Flesh and Blood were pretty sad to see the Pro Tour go away in Magic the Gathering, and so sad that they thought, well, why don't we just bring it back? So the Calling is really kind of going to be with what you might consider a Grand Prix for Magic the Gathering. It's a big event with a direct line to the Pro Tour through invites for the people who are in the top 8 places. And beyond that, they're putting a lot of weight behind this. I think there's about $10,000 in rewards and money for people all the way down to 32nd place. So they're taking the pro scene really seriously, and I'm really excited to dip my toes into that as well.
And like a Grand Prix, the callings have tons of side events and cosplayers and artists, and it's just kind of a festival for the game. It's not you could go there and not even think about playing the main event of the tournament and still have an incredible time. And so I'm sad that I'm not going to get to go to the one in Vegas in just a couple weeks here. But Michael and I are in Dallas, and on October 15th, the calling is coming to Dallas. And that one's actually going to be limited, which we're especially excited about because I think that's both of our favorite formats to play.
Oh, yeah. So, like Andy said, we'll be at the Calling Dallas on October 15th, and I'll be sure to include the dates for the rest of the callings here. But with that, we hope you've enjoyed this discussion. We hope it helps you transfer to what we think is a really exciting game. Please let us know anything that we may have missed or any questions that you have that maybe we can help you figure out. But otherwise, we appreciate you watching, and we hope that you'll look for us here on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.